This here is your dodge range, and this is the danger zone. The boss is about to attack, so where would you place this cross so that the green dot, that's you, stays inside the box to ensure you can get out of the way? Don't think too hard, it's a pretty easy question. If you've played a video game before, you probably placed it in one of these spots, and if you did, you'd be correct. Positioning yourself in any of these spots or further will result in you being able to dodge the attack. Okay, then what if we shrink where you can place the dot to here while keeping the hitbox of the attack the exact same size? Now where would you place it? It's a trick question, right? There's nowhere you can go to dodge anymore because the size of the attack's hitbox exceeds the range of your dodge. So let me ask you this, is this a problem you can solve by simply improving your play, or is this undodgeable attack a matter of artificial difficulty? Whenever you face a hard boss in any game, you might be inclined to look online for some tips and tricks on how to defeat it. Maybe you're the type to just brute force it and keep trying non-stop until you win, or perhaps you're brave enough to complain on reddit.com only to be flooded with a deluge of get goods. There are two sides to this story, and I think in understanding both of them and the points they're trying to make, we can get a better idea of whether or not getting good is an actual solution. Of course, this is going to vary on a boss-to-boss basis, but I think I've found an answer that fits with practically any boss I can think of, and I did so by facing what may be the most divisive boss I've ever fought. So let's use it as an example to figure out if the solution to these challenging bosses really is just a matter of better gameplay, or if there may be something even more important that we're totally missing in our blind pursuit of skill. This is the final boss of Monster Hunter World Iceborne, and what many people consider to be one of the hardest bosses in the series. It seems like the majority of people love this fight, but a shockingly large number of people don't. What surprised me the most wasn't simply the quantity though, it's the range of people's opinions here that's so interesting to me. So I decided to give it a shot and see for myself if this fight really was everything people say it is, for better and for worse. Now, please pay close attention to this next part since I seriously don't want anyone to get the wrong idea here, and quite frankly, a lot of this video won't make sense unless you understand this context. So when I first fought this boss, I wanted to do it in the most pure and distilled way possible, by my personal standards of course. This is in no way the objectively correct way to beat the boss, in fact it's probably the opposite, but it's how I personally wanted to do it. Here's the checklist. First, this boss drops the best gear in the game, and most people will recommend using said gear to solo it. That's a bit of a catch-22, so because of that I wanted to beat him without using any of his drops. Next, I wanted to do it solo, since that's just how I like playing these games. Finally, I hadn't fought this boss until this point, and while I had seen people fighting it here and there, for the most part I was almost totally blind going in. In the end, it took 8 attempts and around 4 hours to beat the boss. There are a few more technical things that you won't understand if you don't play Monster Hunter, so I'll just throw them on screen real quick for those curious about the details. Now, I say all of this not to brag or show off how good I am at the game, because if we're being real, I'm not. No, I'm saying this so that you understand the context of everything else I'm about to say. I have since fought this boss dozens of times with multiple weapons, both with these pseudo-challenge restrictions in place and in a more normal way with full endgame gear. After doing so, I let my thoughts sit for a few weeks before starting this script to ensure that I wasn't writing an emotional, reactionary hit piece about how much I hate this boss, but instead a genuine and honest look at one of the most divisive bosses I've ever seen in a game. I want to know why some people consider this one of the best bosses of all time, a pure test of skill in a one-of-a-kind showdown with a near unstoppable foe, while others say it's an unfinished mess that ruined the ending of an otherwise phenomenal game. I want to understand how there could be such a profound array of opinions that all refer to the exact same thing. Are the people who don't like this boss just not good enough, or is there genuine validity in their claims of artificial difficulty and unfair mechanics? More than anything though, I want to know who's actually right, and I think I finally have my answer. So without further ado, this is the Black Dragon Fatalis, the single greatest and most terrible boss I've ever fought. The boss takes place in a closed arena, which is special for Monster Hunter since you're usually running around chasing these guys and, well, hunting them. Fatalis is different though, he's not going anywhere. He's perfectly content fighting you one-on-one and would sooner turn the battlefield into a smoldering pile of ash than flee from it. The spectacle here is second to none, nobody's arguing that, so that's why I'd like to start by focusing on the mechanics of this fight first, since that's where we can really begin to see just how much skill matters here. Let's begin with the hitboxes and specific attacks before making a final call on whether or not this boss's moveset is artificially difficult and unfair. We'll start with the Fire Chomp. This is an attack where the boss will hook its head around and bite at the player. It can be deceptively difficult to dodge, and it's tough to understand exactly why, so let's strip it down to the fundamentals. So watch how the path of this hitbox looks from above. Now let's fill in the danger zone. And just to be clear, this danger zone is not the one-to-one hitbox of this move, just the area in which you're extremely likely to get hit. So despite looking fairly easy to dodge at a glance, when you see it this way, it becomes pretty clear why this attack is a bit of a problem. First, there's this awkward hook motion. You see the monster reel back and you think, okay, he's gonna charge, I should jump left. But if you do, you get caught by the hook. Naturally then, you might think to go right, but that won't work either since that's actually where the attack ends. This means right and left won't work. You can't go back since that's the direction he's already charging in, and going forward would obviously result in some damage since generally rolling into a giant dragon that's charging at you is a bad idea. Now, if we put this cross representing the hunter's roll distance in the danger zone with the hunter in the middle of it, you can see why you physically can't get out of the way. No matter where you are, unless you're touching one of those lines with your cross, you'll likely get hit. So how exactly do you dodge this attack? Well, you've got two paths to go down, technically three. First is a large reason why Monster Hunter has such a unique feel to the combat: positioning. In most games, rolling will give you iframes, and while that's still true in Monster Hunter, they're extremely limited. I'm talking 2 or 3 at most. You're really not going to be rolling through attacks like you're playing Kingdom Hearts or Dark Souls. The idea here is to position yourself in such a way that the attack won't hit you. It's because of this that Monster Hunter's combat often feels more predictive than reactive. You have to have a good feel of what the monster's options are at any given moment and position yourself in such a way that those options aren't as threatening to you. Going back to the Fire Chomp example, if you get just close enough, right next to his chest, then when he jumps up for a moment just before the chomp, you can roll under him and get out of the way before the attack even comes out. Your other option is to dodge reactively like you do in Dark Souls with the help of a certain setup. See, there's a skill called Evade Up, which grants your rolls more iframes. If you use this, you can just dodge through this attack along with most others. Granted, it may still be pretty tight, but it's much more reasonable than the 2 or 3 iframes that you were working with before. Now, there is a third option where you either don't use Evade Up and just dodge straight through with your 2 or 3 iframes, or you measure the hitboxes so precisely that you know exactly how and when to roll so that they never hit you. I'm just gonna level with you though. I have no idea where most of those windows are, and they're extremely impractical for the average player, so I'm not gonna focus on them too much. Anyway, all of this together seems like a skill moment, right? Seems like you just have to know when and where to dodge and you'll be good to go. Well, yes and no. There are 2 problems. First, the actual size of the hitbox is generous to say the least. You'll often get hit by these in ways that are a bit debatable. This wouldn't be much of a problem if it weren't for that second thing: the damage. In Monster Hunter, quests can last up to 50 minutes, and this one generally takes just under half an hour to complete. Mercifully, you get 3 or 4 deaths before you fail the quest and have to start over, but when most attacks hit for half of your health or more, those slightly exaggerated hitboxes can become a sizable threat. This is a trend that continues in a lot of Fatalis' attacks, and that combination of overwhelmingly high damage alongside comically generous hitboxes can be rather frustrating to deal with. Just look at the fireballs. These have explosions on impact, so I get there's a bit of extra range, but I mean, come on, does this thing really need an AoE so big that it can clearly and obviously miss the fireball, but still land the hit because the explosion is the size of Texas? Especially when that explosion can just flat out kill you in one hit. And again, when the fight is filled with stuff like this, they can quickly compound and become a serious problem. This is an extremely important idea for later, so we'll throw it in a folder and take it out when it comes up again. Now, is this so bad that it becomes artificially difficult? Honestly, I don't know if we can come up with a solid conclusion with that alone. However, we've barely scratched the surface, so let's take a deeper look at some of the more unique ideas on display here. This is where a trend arises that'll really give credence to the whole artificial difficulty idea. So what you're looking at right now is the cone attack. Oh, sorry, that's the subscribe button. Just go ahead and hit it. Out of the way so we can continue. This cone is probably Fatalis' best and worst move. It leaves the dragon wide open for a few seconds, allowing you to get a ton of free damage in. This goes far beyond just lowering the boss's HP though, as it allows you to damage the head specifically. Keep that in mind. This cone isn't purely a good thing for the player though. It does have a severe negative. If you're too far away when this attack starts, or if you're on the ground, you're pretty much cooked. Literally. Seems balanced enough at a glance. If you're close, you get a big opening, but if you're far away, you take a ton of damage. Here's where things get a bit messy though. First, there's the combo potential. It's entirely possible to get hit by one attack and have Fatalis follow up with a cone. So if you're already on the ground after getting hit, you'd be lucky to have more than 50% health. More likely, you'll be well below half. When this happens, you won't have time to heal and you'll die in the cone long before you have the chance to run away from it. This creates an awful feeling where it honestly does seem like there was nothing you could do. Of course, there's always the don't get hit excuse, and yeah, sure, I guess that applies, but dying to a cone combo feels unfair because once the combo starts, you can no longer prevent it. It's as though you're getting disproportionately punished for your mistakes, and all you can do is sit there and hope. It's not just the combos though, the sheer size of this attack is genuinely insane. Here, I'll draw it out. See, it's just a big triangle that stretches out in front of Fatalis and across practically the entire field. The only area it doesn't reach is the upper part of the battlefield where some of the siege weapons are located. If Fatalis does this attack when you're too far away, you've only got one hope of escape. You need to hide behind these pillars. They'll block the flames and keep you safe. Great in theory, not so much in practice. This is another one of those you're dead before you even get hit situations. Just like with the combos, if you're not already in the right place when Fatalis does this attack, you're just dead. There's nothing you can do. These flame cones are especially bad if you try to use the siege weaponry around the area. These are super cool, and despite not having to use them, I like to whenever I can. They're these ballistas and cannons that you can shoot at Fatalis for some free damage. However, they come with a few sizable risks. First, they plant you firmly in place. The only exception to this is the Roman ballista, which can move on a short track. Second, because you're stuck in one place, you're especially vulnerable to the fireballs, fire breath, and of course, the aforementioned cone, assuming you're not on that upper level that I mentioned earlier. If Fatalis cones while you're on one of these, you're probably dead. These, like the combo deaths, can feel rather unfair and even clunky since it takes a while to dismount the siege weaponry, and if you see Fatalis backing up for a cone, you know it's likely already too late. This major weakness is balanced by the fact that if you deal enough collective damage with any of the siege weapons, you can get a free knockdown on Fatalis to deal a ton of damage, especially to the head. I mentioned this briefly before, but it's time we bring up what may be Fatalis' second most important mechanic, the blue flames. So if you don't break the dragon's horns before phase 3, it'll gain these new blue flames that'll drastically increase its damage output and turn nearly every single attack into a potential one-shot. Are you starting to notice a trend here? It dealt a ton of damage before, but this is on a totally different level. While it may technically be possible to survive a hit from the blue flames, it's just not practical. Because of this, it's absolutely essential that you break the horns at least once before phase 3 begins. This isn't an easy task though. If you have eyes, there's a good chance you've already noticed that this guy's head is pretty far off the ground most of the time. That's why these knockdowns and cones are so important. This is weapon dependent too. Some weapons are going to struggle to hit the head more than others, and the ones that focus on single target highly concentrated DPS like dual blades or greatsword are going to do far better than more utility heavy specialists like insect glaive. And remember, you practically need to break these horns, so for those classes that struggle to do that, the fight is going to be significantly more difficult. Okay, let's tie this all together. Fatalis is a boss that takes well over 20 minutes to beat. It has generous hitboxes that can be deceptively large, multiple one-shot attacks, and just as many ways to combo you if it doesn't manage to kill you in one hit, and as if the fight wasn't volatile enough already, it's got a mechanic that, if you don't hit its head currently located in the stratosphere enough before phase 3, you practically auto lose the fight. Despite all of this, if you try to talk about how hard this boss is, you'll likely be met with the aforementioned deluge of get goods and skill issues. And as I was fighting this boss, I wholeheartedly disagreed with all of that. I thought it was artificially difficult, unfair garbage, but like it or not, they might actually be right. Kind of. So let's talk about the other side of the argument. Yes, Fatalis has a ton of ridiculous nonsense, but there's counterplay to all of it, right? I mean, I already mentioned that if you just stay close, the cone isn't a problem. The fire chomp can either be iframed or preemptively dodged, even if that second one does require a bit of luck. And finally, the siege weaponry, while extremely risky, can deal a substantial portion of the boss's health. You see, there's an interesting trend that flows through nearly this entire fight, this idea of risk versus reward. Let's look at 3 examples: low risk, medium risk, and high risk. Starting from the bottom, we've got a slightly weaker version of the fire chomp. This is an attack with low range and high speed. Thankfully, because it's so quick, it actually doesn't deal that much damage, but equally, it doesn't leave much of an opening either. It's a low risk move for Fatalis with a low reward as well. Moving up a tier, we've got the fire breath attacks. This is basically an entire genre of attacks, but they're all similar enough that we can zoom into just one to get a general idea of the entire group. So this is a sweeping attack that slowly clears most of the arena. If you're far away, you have to dive to avoid it, and with the damage being as high as it is, you're really gonna want to avoid it. So high range and high damage. To balance this out, we need a large opening, and wouldn't you believe it, that's exactly what we've got. You can latch onto the monster's head to deal a bit of free damage here and even weaken it with your clutch claw, or if you've already tenderized the monster with the claw, you can just go to town and get a bunch of free hits in while it slowly crawls back. Finally, we've got the cone, the definition of high risk, high reward. This attack is about as deadly as it gets, but as we talked about before, it leaves Fatalis' head wide open. This trend extends far beyond normal attacks though. Think about it, the siege weapons are risky since they plant you in place, but also deal a massive amount of damage and knock the monster down. Slamming Fatalis into a wall will deal a ton of damage as well, even to the head, but it'll also cause him to go into his enraged state where he'll hit harder, use more follow-ups, and generally just fight more aggressively. Finally, the pinnacle of this is his iconic giant giant flame. Remember how this fight is in a closed arena? Well, these giant flames are your best chances to heal, reapply buffs, sharpen your weapon, or just catch your breath during this grueling marathon of a boss fight. That is, of course, if you manage to dodge the flame. It's called giant for a reason, as it covers the entire field and will almost always one-shot you. So not only are there countermeasures for this entire fight, but the whole thing is balanced in such a way that both sides have equal opportunities against each other. I especially love this because it exemplifies how the game does such a good job of telling a story with this fight. The lore here is that Fatalis is the big bad. He's the world-ending dragon that world-ending dragons are afraid of, and up to this point, you've been the hunter that stops world-ending dragons. It's the unstoppable force and the immovable object, both at the top of their class and the peak of their powers, the absolute upper limit of what monsters and hunters are capable of. And that's exactly what this fight feels like when you're playing at your best. The monster can't get away with just throwing out its most powerful attacks, and neither can you. You both have to plan and think carefully about your next move, otherwise the opposing party will severely punish you for your misstep. It all culminates in this final phase where the ground itself is on fire. You're constantly taking damage as Fatalis pulls out all the stops against this irreverent hunter who has the sheer audacity to push it this far. Then when the hunter pulls out their strongest weapon, their giant flame equivalent, the Dragonator, the music changes. The song not so subtly titled Proof of a Hero begins to play, and it's in this moment that this is no longer the hunter's challenge against the boss Fatalis, but Fatalis' desperate attempt to survive the hunter. You're not trapped in here with him, he's trapped in here with you, and there's nothing he can do about it. No blue flame to bail him out, no flares that he can coat the field with, not a single attack he can use nor flame he can conjure up will stop what's about to... Yeah, this might be artificially difficult garbage. I distinctly remember how badly I wanted to love this boss. I've been a fan of the series for just under a decade now, and this was supposed to be one of the best bosses it had to offer. So needless to say, I was almost shaking with excitement when I was finally there, face to face with the newest version of the legendary Black Dragon that I had heard so much about before. Then it did its first giant flame, and I threw my hands up and said, yup, this is cinema, this is peak, wrap it up, we're done here. Yes, the hitboxes were annoying, the siege weapons were clunky, the damage was laughably overtuned, and did the stance transition really have to be a hard knockdown? I mean, seriously, this one just feels excessive. Sorry. The point is I was able to forgive it all, but the timer was my breaking point. However, it's not the deciding factor in whether or not this fight is artificial difficulty for me. That may not make sense, so let me explain. The reason the timer is such a problem is actually rather simple. I just mentioned this, but the framing of this fight, the context, the spectacle, and even the mechanics themselves all lead to this outstanding showdown between the strongest dragon and the strongest dragon slayer. It's like two forces of nature colliding to decide the fate of the world itself. Okay, maybe it's not that dramatic, but that's really how it feels. It's been half an hour, you've endured the one-shots, you've broken the horns, you've avoided the azure flames, and you've survived the flares. The area itself is ablaze, both you and the dragon are fully aware that only one of you is coming out of this alive, when suddenly the timer introduces itself to say, oh, sorry, the fight's over, you lose, good try though. It just kinda sucks. It feels like you're 10 years old again and you're playing out of your mind about to break your older brother's high score, only for him to quickly go, whoa, that wasn't supposed to happen, and snatch the controller from you before you get the chance. This problem is partially solved by just using better gear though. After all, when I went back and refought this boss with full Fatalis gear, it was a totally different story. I was consistently able to beat it with plenty of time to spare. However, I really can't stress this enough. I just disagree with the idea of making the timer one of the major conditions for failure, as it effectively becomes a gear check that, if you don't complete, robs you of an ending to this, quite frankly, incredible fight. The timer by itself isn't the sole problem though. Remember that folder from earlier? Well, it's finally time to open it back up. Surely you've heard of the phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back, or death by 1,000 cuts. That's what this fight feels like sometimes. There's so much wrong here that I could forgive if they weren't all in the same fight. I could forgive the awkward hitboxes if the attacks didn't also one-shot you. I could forgive the blue flames if the boss's moves had a range that wasn't larger than the majority of US states. I could forgive the timer if the boss didn't have 60,000 HP. You get the idea. None of these individually are game breaking. I mean, honestly, most of these individually are hardly even a problem, and that's where the divide comes from. That's where this all goes back to that discussion about skill issues. If I say something like, Fatalis does too much damage, someone will respond with, well, make sure your health is high and stop getting hit. And we'd both be right, wouldn't we? I mean, sure, the boss has a lot of nonsense, but ultimately, the solution here really is just to play better. It almost always always is, isn't it? When I fought Morgott for the first time, I, like most other people who played Elden Ring, really struggled. I think it took me well over a full day to beat him, and by the end of it, I didn't gain some new piece of information that I was missing, or find a super weapon that could fell him in a single powerful blow. When I got stuck on the final screen of Celeste DLC for what felt like weeks, there was no secret path that I had yet to uncover, no shortcut that I hadn't located. When I got stuck on Zamtrios in 4U, don't worry about that too much, I wasn't able to win because I figured out this hidden weakness and used some special item to defeat him. In each and every one of these scenarios, I just got better. I could have gone online and complained about the tracking on Morgott's attacks, or the overly inflated health pool of Zamtrios, or the excessively lengthy challenge of that final screen in Celeste, but whether I liked it or not, they really were just tests of skill. However, that doesn't mean those complaints aren't both useful and valid. You see, there's a vital piece of information, a lesson to be taken here that we can apply to almost any challenging boss from any game in any genre. A lesson that so many people in so many different spaces fail to understand. A flawed boss can still require skill to defeat, and a boss that requires skill to defeat can still be flawed. Just because a boss is skill heavy doesn't mean it's automatically absolved of any and all wrongdoing. Equally, the inability to beat a boss on your first or second try doesn't automatically make it artificially difficult nonsense. I think both sides, myself included, need to learn to be more patient not just with the boss in question, but with each other. I mean, imagine a world where we just claimed every boss was flawless and that any problems are actually just skill issues. How would we ever improve the actual quality of these bosses? I think those critiques are important, necessary even. Moderation is key here though. We shouldn't complain about a boss if we haven't given it a fair chance, but just as important, we shouldn't automatically assume that anyone who doesn't like a challenging boss just isn't good enough. I'll leave you with this. Consider the possibility that perhaps when someone complains about Fatalis or any particularly challenging boss, they're not doing it because they're frustrated and think this boss is terrible, but because they truly love this game and want the next one to be even better.